Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Kitchen. My name's Carrie, I'm your host, and today is Super Bowl Sunday, but Ida is going to help us get ready because Ida's always ready and Ida always knows what is up. And I have to kind of pinch myself to the caliber of guests I have been able to get to do this. Today, in her Hollywood Kitchen debut, we are very proud to welcome Alexandra Saros, author of the brand new book, Ida Lupino, Forgotten Auteur. From film noir to the director's chair. This book just came out. We're going to talk about that. We've got Maureen Lee Linker, who is a terrific author, and her new book, His Girl Hollywood, has just come out. And by the way, heavily inspired by Ida Lupino. And we've also got our returning author and cocktail expert, Liz Locke. And she is going to also talk about a cocktail recipe. And since I feel really lousy, I came down with a cold flu combo, which is not the buy one, get one free anybody wants to get. Liz, I wanted to proceed though, because get people this awesome, you kind of have to. So Liz is really going to help me a lot.
I am happy to when the subject is Ida because I adore her.
I do too. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
Yeah. Well, I'm just gonna get started. I think, Carrie, you're making your meatballs over there, and I'm gonna kick things off with my cocktail. So I don't know if anybody's seen the movie While the City Sleeps. It's a Fritz Lang movie, and there's a great scene. So it's about catching a serial killer, but it's told from the perspective of people who work in a newsroom, and they're all trying to get the scoop. And Ida is one of the reporters, and so is George Saunders. And so Sanders, and they have this great lunch meeting where they're kind of conspiring against the other reporters. And there's a weird thing where, like, there's a bowl of peaches on the table, and George puts one in the glass, and you can't tell what he's doing to it. So I'm going to try and recreate this recipe here. I did a little research and found that it actually started as a German cocktail and then became popular in the 40s and 50s. And it's some places call it peach and champagne. But it's really kind of a cross between a Bellini and a champagne cocktail. I've heard a couple of variations on it, one of which starts with the sugar cube soaked in bitters in the bottom. So I'm going to start with that. And so you just do it like you're doing a champagne cocktail. This is not the proper glass. I was a little limited on my glassware because peaches that you get now are enormous. So if I were making this cocktail again, I would do it in the summer when the peaches are fresh and they're like a smaller, normal size. Like here in Texas, we have Fredericksburg peaches and they're about half the size of this. So you have a lot more options on glassware. But anyway, I had one glass that will fit a peach in it. So you pop it in the glass and you just kind of poke holes in it. You just kind of rough it up a little bit, which is, if you have some aggression to get out about anything lately, this is a great way to do it. So you just kind of poke holes and mash it around, and then you top it with your champagne. And so then it kind of soaks into the fruit then. And it's really lovely. I tried it a couple days ago just to test it, and it really kind of infuses that sparkling wine with just a hint of the peach flavor. So it's not overpowering peach like you would get in a Bellini, but it's just like a really nice, subtle flavor to it. So that is what George was making in the movie. So now when you see it, you'll know. And I've also seen some articles written about it where I guess once you were done with your drink, they would take the peach out and eat it. So I think that's pretty cool.
I did a
Also,
fairly similar thing a while back. We did a Dan Duryea recipe, and you soaked the peaches in liquor and then you set them on fire.
Oh.
And that was a rough one because it basically felt like I was just drinking solid flames or butane. It was weird, but it was fun.
Liz, I was gonna say that's really a perfect drink for you because your dog is named Peaches.
It's true. And I think she's like standing at attention in the background because she kept hearing her name over and over.
What's happening?
So
Well,
yeah.
for the meatballs, we'll go ahead and make the meatballs, get them in the oven, and then we'll get the really good part started with
Mhm.
the conversation. This recipe is really customizable. It'd be great for like a cocktail party, a Super Bowl party if you're doing that today. Since I'm by myself and I sure don't want to spread germs, I'm just gonna make a smaller amount for me. So I've got the ground beef. I'm kind of eyeballing the portions in this case. Put breadcrumbs. We're gonna add pepper, minced onion, and garlic. And then some milk to it. And then I'm gonna stir these up and make meatballs, and then later we'll do the sauce and everything. So I hear Barbara Boyd Doss made this recipe one year for our Oscar cook along, and she said it was really terrific and really easy to make and extremely easy to customize. So let's take it away though and start the conversation because I think that's really the good part and the reason why people are tuning in. So, how did all of you first come to the work of Ida Lupino? How did you first discover her?
I was happened to be in graduate school for the second time not that long ago, and I was getting my PhD, and we had an assignment to look through this really old magazine, and just stop when something hit us. And I was looking, and it was really boring, and it was, Victrolas, and just I couldn't. And then all of a sudden, there was this poster that said "outrage" in huge letters, and I'm outrage. What is that? And it said Ida Lupino. And I knew her obviously as an actress, and I knew she did some directing, but it was vague. And I know something about film, and I did at the time, but I really didn't know the depth of her, the quality and so forth, and the scope of her um, work. So I looked it up and I got really interested. And it's a movie about rape done in 1950, which is really hard to believe because the production code was in effect then. And I just thought this is fantastic. So I started doing a little research and found that there was no archive. And I kind of liked her more for that, that she wasn't constantly, talking about herself and her accomplishments, that she just wanted to work with her head down in a lockdown male environment. So that's how it all started for me.
For me, well, I came to her first through Humphrey Bogart movies because he is one of my favorite actors, and was just immediately struck by her. I know she sort of called herself the poor man's Betty Davis for the roles that she often got at Warner Brothers. But I think that's super unfair to herself because she is so riveting and immediately captures your attention when she's on screen. So definitely came to her as an actress first, and then watching other noir like Roadhouse and things of that nature. But also in undergrad, right after I graduated, once I started learning more about female directors and their role in early Hollywood film history, I was fascinated by it, particularly because it's something that's not studied frequently, and often their achievements are not known. And so I would just start to research as much as I could. And I used to write a column for a website called Ms. in the Biz, that was specifically about groundbreaking or trailblazing old Hollywood women, called Dame in the Game. And Ida was one of the actresses, directors I chose to feature. And so I did a bunch of research on her at that time and really discovered the extent of her directing career, and how ahead of her time she was then, and the types of movies that she was choosing to invest her time and money and energy into, and the social issues she was tackling in the films she was making, and have been in love with her ever since.
Yeah, she's easy to care for. She was self-deprecating sometimes, but that's really only because she just didn't want to be noticed. She wanted to keep working. And I think even though that might have been to her detriment, it's what makes her, it's it's why she's been mislaid all this time. But also she is a paradox. And her movies are they're always full of paradox. And they're always about entrapment. And they're often about disability. And she was very interested in themes that a lot of people weren't interested in, or in the 50s were not talking about. And she brought them out because Roberto Rossellini had such a huge influence on her. So she delved into social realism, and instead of writing about heroic women in a big sense, like Dorothy Arzner, she wrote about the smaller woman, the woman who is just shoved back into the house after the war to just take care of the house, clean, cook, and have children, which is fine. But a lot of women were unhappy. And a lot of men were unhappy because they had just come from either the Korean War or World War II, and they were traumatized. So the men and women in her films are really much more realistic. But she also uses melodrama because she really adored Doug, but she pushes against it. So there's a tremendous amount of things to talk about with her because she was multifaceted with her genres and everything. Film gris, film noir, social realism, the grotesque, romantic comedies. She just action. She wasn't afraid.
Yeah. Liz, how did you discover her?
I think it was actually as a director first. I was obsessed with the movie The Trouble with Angels as a child. I absolutely loved it. And I remember seeing her name in the credits and thinking like, oh, directed by a woman, like no wonder this is great. Um, but no, I loved that movie. And it wasn't until years later that I saw her as an actress. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's the director of The Trouble with Angels. That's wild, you know? And it was so disappointing, Alexandra, when I read the book and read that she did not love that movie as much as I do, and a lot of women my age do. Because she felt that she didn't have the creative control with that one that she did with her independent productions. And so I can certainly see that, how that would be frustrating. But my God, I loved it. And I think it's amazing, like even working within the studio system, strong female characters that she was able to bring through in that and carry on some of the themes that she had in her independent production. She was still able to put those into that one. So yeah, I love it.
That was an interesting approach for you to go the other way
I
around.
know.
That was Rosalind Russell's probably one of her best performances ever.
Oh, she's fantastic. Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
I
I
remember
went
the
to
first
film
time I
school.
watched that movie, though, that having already seen Outrage and Never Fear, I was like, oh, this is not like
I saw her. I had Liz's situation. I went to film school in like the mid 90s. And at that time, it was all male directors. And one day I went into class and they showed us Hard, Fast, and Beautiful. And I remember being like, finally, finally, a female voice. Like it was such a revelation.
Yeah, that was an excellent film. She was pulling together a lot of her skills to wind up with The Hitchhiker, which was her penultimate movie, with the skill of action and also the skill of sort of the moral center of a film. And I think the feminists caught that wrong when they thought because Sally Forrest's character wanted to get married and didn't want to, she got her Wimbledon championship, but she disavowed it and she wanted to get married to this guy and go off and have a kid. And everybody was like, a lot of the female critics were, she's not a feminist. And how can she do that? But Sally Forrest's character wasn't the main character. They got it wrong. It was Claire Trevor's anti-hero who was the main character because she had the character arc. And Lupino was experimenting with levels of morality in that movie. And the tennis shots were incredibly done. And that's what just blows my mind about Lupino. She watched a lot of great directors while she was acting, and she learned quickly. And she got even better. And so many cinematographers wanted to work with her because she knew lenses better than anybody. So she was within the business, people knew about her. But she, as I said, she didn't promote herself.
What were you surprised to learn in writing your book? Were there any revelations that you just were completely shocked by, or discoveries that you were, really not expecting to find?
I was really surprised how she could get these movies made during the production code when they were about the most provocative subjects you can think of. Not Wanted is about unwed motherhood. Nobody wanted to talk about that in 1949, 1950. Rape, of course, outrage was rape, but they couldn't use that. I had to use the word attack. Not Never Fear was about polio. She had some about with polio. So it was about polio, and nobody wanted to hear about polio. There were two things people were frightened of then. I lived then, so I remember the bomb and waking up with polio. Those were the two things. So that film just did not do that well, and it was her second film. And in the industry, as a rule, your first film, if it hits, which Not Wanted did, your second film has to be just as good or better, or else you're like a one-shot wonder, one-hit wonder. But she went on because Howard Hughes financed her. But um, sports, Hard, Fast, and Beautiful was about corruption in female sports, which was very esoteric for the time. And of course, The Hitchhiker was about a serial killer who was near history. He had been executed about the time of the film. So it was a guy who killed 6 people hitchhiking, and everybody, the highways were new then. And so there were hitchhikers on the highways, and it really scared people. And then bigamy. Who wants to see a movie about bigamy, right? So it was just pretty amazing that she could get these things past the production code. Chirac and Breen, Joe Breen, he was kind of an intellectual Catholic guy, and he let, I can see her walking in with that great voice and so intimidating because they've seen her on the screen for so long as a hard boy woman, and calling everybody darling and asking, darling, could you do this and could we do this? And what happened was with Not Wanted, she convinced them that that was a national problem, that teenage pregnancy was a national problem, and she could make it into kind of a docudrama. And so they liked that idea. And so she got it made. And then she continued with that with polio, and she shot in the Kabbat Center. And all the places where she shot there was always pieces of it that were real. Tennis, the same thing, that she went to real locations. She felt like when you're on a real location, it's all there for you and you don't have to do anything else because there's the sense of the location. She's just very smart and she got her way. And I think that's what surprised me so much. How she got those movies made was just incredible.
I think for me, this isn't Ida specific, but more about women directors in general. That when I was researching for His Girl Hollywood, of course, I knew about Ida Lupino, I knew about Dorothy Arzner, I knew about Frances Marion, Lois Weber. There's those big names that even if you haven't seen one of their films, you've probably heard that they were sort of an outlier in this era. I truly did not realize the volume of female directors working in the teens and 20s.
Mhm.
And just, that they weren't outliers at that time, that they were equal, if not more, than men who were directing in that era. And just how many of them, their entire body of work is lost. And I was really surprised because I did know that women were integral to the founding of the industry and the development of the art form. And I knew those big names, but I had no idea there were so many more women that we don't even talk about or have access to their work because it's been lost.
It's true. Yeah, I was surprised by how many of the silent female pictures are gone. And most of the women working in silent film were, did a tremendous output, and they were all over the world. And then when talkies came, it's like women, they no longer were able to work because men just took over. And a lot of things changed. Actors who were big didn't have a good voice, so they were gone. And if you didn't, if your acting was a little bit weird, or it's fine for silent, but not, so they were gone. So after the silence, everything changed.
Yeah.
And there's so many women directors, and just many. Elvira Notari was brilliant. She was from Italy, and she made many, many, many films. Everything's lost. It's the saddest thing.
I for what really struck me about that is that, so many of us, our inspirations, our dreams come from what we see. Like you can't be something you don't see.
Mhm.
And so in writing Arlene, my heroine, and His Girl Hollywood, who is a female director in the studio system, a rarity, just like Ida or Dorothy Arzner,
Mhm.
um, this book is set in 1937, and she's in her late 20s. And so it occurred to me, once I found the volume of women who are working in this time, that her entire childhood she would have been seeing films directed by women. The pictures that she would have been going to, at least 50% of them would have been directed by women. And so that as a dream, as something you would want to do as a profession, would not seem out of reach, um, only to grow up and have it be very out of reach and very unrealistic, and have the pressure of knowing that there are so few of you, that if you make a misstep, you're not
Oh,
just ruining the opportunity for yourself, you're potentially ruining it for every other woman who comes after you, even if it's not a mistake, even if it's something entirely out of your control, but the film doesn't go well,
mhm.
you've eliminated that opportunity for other women who want that chance. And so that really played a big role in her arc in the storytelling, is going from growing up surrounded by all these women doing this to suddenly being out isolated on a desert island, basically.
Yeah, I don't think she was that enamored of acting. Her father really pushed her into that because he was a famous comic actor. And her second cousin, Lupino Lane, was really, really famous. And so she got her first role. It was supposed to be her mother's role in My First Affair. And they decided on Ida instead of her mother. Her mother was a musical comedy actress and singer. So what happened was she sort of that way because she's from that theatrical family. They go back 350 years to Italy, to the court of Naples, where her relatives, her ancestors were acrobats and clowns. And they had to flee Naples, and they came to Britain, and that's how they landed there. But she was in this sort of, you know, Hollywood royalty kind of family. And so she was just going to act. And she did a lot of plays and theater when she was young. Her father built her a little playhouse, and she did it for a while. But then when the stereotypes were just too much for her, she couldn't take it anymore. Then she said, "You know what? Now I'm going to direct," and that was something she really did want to do. And she felt like she knew how to do it. It's not brain surgery, by the way, but she felt like I can do this. And she really studied hard, like a lot of women do. They try harder and work harder and are more adept because they know they have to. For every second, she thought she was going to be, shut down. And interestingly, after Elaine May came in to the guild in 1971, Lupino had been there 21 years by herself, and then Elaine May came. And then after Elaine May, there were like 8 or 10 or maybe even 13 other actresses who became directors. And then they were gone. And it's, Lee Grant, um, Joanne Woodward, Cecily, and there's several. They were mostly actresses turned directors. And some of them went to AFI, and but they all made movies, and some really classic films that are still being studied, but then they were gone again. And Maya Smuckler wrote a really good book on that. It's about the women directors, and I'm trying to think. I forgot the name of it. She'll kill me. But anyway, it's a really good book by Maya Smuckler, and she talks about all these 10 or 12 women. So it's very interesting how it's so easy for women to go, and it's not easy for them to come in.
Mhm. I was thinking about this whole thing this morning, because when I grew up, like I got used to seeing names like Nancy Myers or Penny Marshall, or Nora Ephron before the credits, and I guess I didn't really think anything of it. I just thought like women are directors. Like I grew up thinking that, and then cut to now, and it just seems like, man, it's a rarity. And then looking back at classic Hollywood, it was really a rarity. And I think like what really surprised me the most about Ida's journey is that like she worked in, I didn't really think about the independent film scene of the 1940s and 50s. You know, you think of that as a uniquely like 1990s Sundance kind of thing. And I guess I always assumed that, while the Hollywood studio system was in place, that was the only way to make movies. But my God, she really went around it and just worked it to her benefit. Like you were saying, with the way she worked with the censors, it's just incredible the stuff that she was able to get made. And I will say, going back to Not Wanted, I think in the book you talk about how she, like the way she was able to get that made was it's a cautionary tale for teen mothers. And that birthing scene looked very much like a horror film. I mean, childbirth in the 50s probably was very much that, but she really shot it in a horror manner. So it's just amazing the creative ways that she was able to work within this system, but also outside the system, because she was, writing and producing and directing independently. So I just found that really fascinating.
Yeah. Tremendous energy.
Hmm.
She would go act in a movie that maybe she didn't care about so much. She'd take that money and then she'd put it into one of her movies because she always needed help. They were Poverty Row films. They were
Hmm.
very inexpensive. And she'd borrow sets from people. She was friends with John Garfield, and she'd say, can I use your set? He was done with it. He said, yeah, go ahead. And she'd just use that set, just really scrappy.
Hmm.
And to me, that's really creative when you can do that. That's really true creativity. Because let's face it, I don't care if there are triple shadows on the walls. If the film is great and it's talking about something interesting, I'm riveted. But if it's beautiful and perfect, but there's no story and the acting's bad, I can't watch it. So, she zeroed in on what was important.
Hmm.
She let the rest go. And she loved doing it because she was free. You know, um, Scorsese loved her and he talks about her a lot. And I quoted him a lot in my book. And one of the things he says about her is that her films were quiet films. He called them quiet films, sort of like Cat People. And Musaraka had been the DP on Cat People, and it's very quiet. And there's a woman in a like a pool, but you think she's outside, but it's a studio pool, and it's just the echoing and just her looking around and getting more and more scared. No music, a cat, the shadow of a black cat, walking by. And it's really scary. It builds and builds and builds. And Hitchcock said that she could do suspense and surprise, which is really hard to do. And I saw a lot of her television shows where she did that. And I just think it's such a testament to her stick-to-itiveness and her fearlessness, you know? And she's just, to me, she's a fascinating character, and I'm really glad people are seeing her work. I'm in the process of restoring Not Wanted right now.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's great to know because the print that I saw was absolutely terrible. I was like on YouTube or something. It was just awful. So that makes me so happy because that one, it's just a tremendous film. And Never Fear was the first. After The Trouble with Angels, Never Fear was the next one that I saw that she had directed, and the print that I saw on that one was pretty good. But yeah, what an incredible movie, and so relevant now. I mean, I can't believe polio is back in the conversation again, but it is, and it's incredible that that movie did not do well at the time that it was made. But I guess it was just ahead of its time, because I thought it was just tremendous.
I think people were frightened of polio and they changed the name of it to My Lovely, something My Lovely. I don't know. It was a terrible name. And then they changed it to Never Fear.
Mhm.
That was the final title. And some people, when they write about it, they get it mixed up that was that Never Fear was the first title. It's the second title. It's the title
Mhm.
that she finally named it, called it. But the disability of a woman's body, the feeling of a woman who isn't whole. And I think that reflects her in many ways, you know.
Mhm.
She seems like she's kind of an outlier and she's odd and you know maybe not valuable enough in some way, you know, because she really wanted to talk about how a woman feels who is not whole about her body. And that's so advanced. Nobody even wants to see that now.
You're
You know,
right.
Always
we're
occurs to me when
really
talking about the trailblazers is the fact that when they are an outlier, there's no like support group. There's no one you can call and say, hey, I had a really rough week on set. Let's go out and have a beer and talk about blah, blah, blah. I mean, you don't have a buddy or a person you can call and say, what did you do when this happened? How did you feel when this? Because there's no one else. You're kind of a lone person. I mean, like,
that's true. That's true. Yeah.
I was
Very
going to say, Alexandra, it's so interesting too, you talking about her scrappiness and the storytelling being the key versus the glossiness or the composition or beauty of an image. And I think, those things sort of feed into each other too. Like if you were making a movie about rape or extramarital pregnancy or things like that, you don't want it to look like an MGM film from 1942 because people won't take the subject matter seriously, or it will treat it in an unrealistic way. And I think she both, you know, that was the reality of the resources that she had available to her. But I think she also intuitively knew that for the type of storytelling that interested her, she wasn't going to be working within that system anyway.
It's very true. That's right. Yeah. It's she liked these notions that don't lend themselves to gloss, you know, moral centers and levels of morality and open endings and looking at people in a three-dimensional way, whether they're a criminal, but why are they criminals? I mean, she had tremendous empathy for her people. She called them bewildered people, lost people. And I think she felt that way about herself. And in The Hitchhiker, Bill Tallman's role, I mean, he's a serial killer. He killed six people. He'd get in the car and kill you and take your money. And, but even she had empathy for him. And it was really interesting because he had a point in the movie when he had these guys and he was holding them and they weren't necessarily all good themselves. And he pointed that out. And then she, in a way, tells his story, Bill Tallman's story. I mean, he was five kids from five kids, and the mother died, and the father put all the kids in a well and left him there. And all four were adopted, but he wasn't because he had a slow eye. And so you started to feel sorry for this killer, and understand why he was the way he was. And I don't think people were doing that. It was very black and white, good versus evil. And people still like that. But I mean, at the time, it was very much like that. So,
Yeah, speaking of The Hitchhiker, we've talked a lot about her making movies that reflect women's actual reality and the issues that they were going through. But it's fascinating to me that she could also make a movie like The Hitchhiker. And you touch on in the book about her television career, how she was labeled kind of a blood and guts director for doing a lot of westerns and detective stories. So it's fascinating to me that she did not stay just within one genre. She worked so broadly.
she really did. Yeah, she really did. The Hitchhiker, I think, is her best film, all put together. And she thought that of herself. She thought that was her best film too. Um, but Hard, Fast, and Beautiful is pretty good. And then she has such great directorial efforts. And I actually have a chart with a lot of information about all the things she's directed. And I'm going to add it into my website. I have a website, idalupino.com, and anybody can go and look at it. You don't have to have the book. And it shows a lot of things that aren't in the book, color pictures, posters at the time, not a lot of text, but several galleries, and you can jump around. And it gives you a little bit more of an insight because UT could only do so many pictures. I mean, I think I found in my archival studies 250 images. So obviously, you can't, you know, and then to make them look good is very hard. Some of them were torn paper. There's this teacher, professor, he was at UCLA for years. He's Italian. His name's Carlo Ginsberg. And he taught a class in fingerprinting. And so he also taught classes in history and historiography. But one of the things he said was that when you go into an archive, you have to look around corners. You have to look for fragments and traces and footprints. And that's the only way you're going to be able to piece things together when there isn't an archive. And that's what I found so fascinating, that work. I went to Bologna, I went to all these places in New York City, and I went to UT. Obviously, they have some stuff there. Tom Schatz had collected some things, and then everywhere in LA, lots of things. The Mark Herrick Library for sure, but a lot of places have little bits and pieces, and that to me was really fascinating.
I was intrigued, and this is kind of circling back to Hollywood Kitchen, how you say in the book that her image at the time was feminized by placing her in like recipes and how-to columns in magazines. I'm sure that was really fascinating to find in your research.
Was. It was, and she was supposed to feminize herself because they just did, and she agreed with that. Like she didn't want to do anything that was going to keep her from working. So she, because she's a good writer, she wrote those herself. So they got a 2-for-1 with her, always.
It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, that was really very
Admire
interesting.
how no nonsense she is. Like
Mm.
that to me is one of the things that sticks with me about her.
Yeah, it's really true. She really is. And, she projected that, and I'm sure that's how she got things done. She just, you don't ask, you don't get kind of, you know, mindset. And she had a lot of courage. By the way, at the Mary Pickford, they have films of her, 8 millimeter films of her that Gypsy Rose Lee took during the Trouble with Angels. And Gypsy Rose Lee liked to shoot 8 millimeter silent of all kinds of films she was in and things she did. And at the Billy Rose Library in New York, all those films are there because they were a TV show for a while or something like that. And Gypsy Rose Lee shoots her directing, and you can tell she hates it. She's like, she puts her head down, she has glasses on, she keeps turning her head away from the camera, and she's trying to get this stuff done. And Gypsy Rose Lee, who she cast as a nun to be funny, you know, was there shooting these 8 millimeter films of her. And I was called over there. They wanted to know if I knew certain things, why this, why that kind of thing. And I was just blown away by this footage. So maybe you can look at that if you're interested. It's the Mary Pickford, I think it's on Vine, and it's a small holding, little archive. And they have these films of her actually directing. It's fascinating. There's this one place where you see them running through the snow, the girls run
Mhm.
through snow. And then there's Gypsy Rose Lee takes a close up and it's their bags of asbestos.
Oh
The
God.
stuff they use for snow. And I saw Lupino had a mask on, and I thought, oh my God. But, the actress, what's the actress's name?
June Harding or Haley Mills?
Ellie Mills.
Yeah,
She's living and she seems fine. So I guess she's
she
in
is.
asbestos
June
poisoning.
has sadly passed away. I hope it's not from the asbestos.
I couldn't believe it. I thought, oh my God. They just didn't know then.
Wild.
I know, but those films are great. They show
Clearly,
her.
they knew something though if she was wearing a mask.
Right. Notice that? I know. I thought that was the only one with a mask on. So maybe the dust was bothering her because she was a smoker. So she, maybe so she started coughing. So she probably, yeah. But the Mary Pickford is it's just a gold mine of very interesting esoteric things.
Alexandra, were there films that you're working to restore? Will those get a streaming or DVD release?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. Not Wanted is on Blu-ray, but it's terrible. So we're doing it at Burbank and they do great with sound. And I just did number 5 checked out. So there's no dirt around the frame at all. And the sound is fantastic because the sound then came out of these microphones that are this big on our TV sets, right? So the sound is terrible. So this guy, he's very good with sound and he redid all the sound and you feel like you're watching a TV show that was just made, you know. So that's really, I'm happy about that. Um, and I don't know if they restored The Hitchhiker, but it's of course in the Library of Congress as the first noir directed by a woman. Um, and as far as Hard Fast, I don't know if those are being restored. It's hard to get these to restore them. There's a lot of protocol and you have to go through a lot. Um, and her legacy is so slipshod that certain things get made and done and then others don't. So it's crawling along. But I love Not Wanted. So I really wanted to restore it. There's a scene in there in jail where you have all white women in jail. Okay. And Ida wanted to have a black woman, a Chinese woman. She wanted to have all kinds of different, okay. And the board of directors said no. But she snuck in a Chinese woman anyway, who's in there. And the board of directors got really angry. But she's always trying to do ethnic sort of things, like Hong Kong, her TV show Hong Kong, that she did a lot of, she directed a lot of those episodes, and Have Gun Will Travel, of course, had an Asian influence in San Francisco. She was, she was very ahead of her time politically and in every way.
Was she the only woman to ever direct an episode of The Twilight Zone?
Yes, yes. And it's the 5th most popular uh, of all of them, supposedly. Yeah. Yeah, it's the grotesque. And she loved the grotesque. Did you see that? Have you seen that episode?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. This is Rod Serling's centennial year. So I did an episode about his life and his career back in December. But yeah, I had a great time revisiting a lot of those episodes. And
Those were fantastic. I used to watch them all the time. Um, yeah, there was Boris Karloff Presents, where it's called the guillotine, and she presents this guy who's up for murder, and he tries to get out of jail using his girlfriend, and she tries to seduce the executioner. And I can't think of any worse job than being an executioner. But he like loved his blade and he would clean it and put it in a case. It was the most interesting episode and it's really suspenseful. He's crawling to the guillotine because the girlfriend has poisoned him, but he's gonna kill this guy. He's gonna get there. And then they take the guy and he's in the hold. And I won't tell you what happens, but it's when Boris Karloff presents, and it's fantastic. And she loved the grotesque. Yeah.
And Alexandra, what I know you have an event at the Hammer Museum coming up. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're presenting there?
I'm going to present, one of them's a surprise, so I'm not allowed to say yet. But I'm also going to present, This Is Your Life, Ida Lupino, which is so hard to watch because you can see it on YouTube. She's so upset that she was surprised, by Ralph Edwards, and she was so embarrassed. And her face, she goes through, it's really a good way to get to know her. And then the other one is the Mr. Adams and Eve episode where she plays herself, Ida Lupino, and Eve Drake, the star of the episode. So that's a really interesting one. That's been at the Paley. No one's been able to see that. And so I asked Mark Quigley if he could just please get that so that people could really see it. It's fantastic. And it shows her directing, and she sits on this crane, and her crane work was very famous. So she says, "Bring me up, boys." And they take her up in this crane, and it's so great. And so that's the other thing. And then the third one is a piece that I'm showing. Um, and we'll talk a little bit. I'll talk with Maya a little bit. And then there's some book signing. I think they're going to get the books airdropped or something that night. I don't know.
Edmonds is going to be there, I think, to have some books.
Yes, yeah, yes, he is. As long as we get the books. Elizabeth Winkler and I have been working on this, trying to get that.
Alexandra, because you've talked a lot about sort of just her desire to just keep her head down and get the work done, and that humility and lack of ego. In your research, did you find that, beyond just her gender and the fact that her films were these lower budget independent projects, do you think that that aspect of her personality contributed to the title of your book, Forgotten Auteur, that because she wasn't really like a huge self advocate, that's also part of why maybe her work isn't as well known, or a lot of it's been sort of left to molder?
I think so, yeah. I mean, Lucy Liggett.
She was labeled.
Lucy Liggett wrote a dissertation in 1976 that called her an auteur. And so she was the first person that called her an auteur. And there was a lot of pushback for me to do that, not from UT, but from UCLA. They said, "Oh, don't get into auteur. Oh my God, it's a minefield." I said, "But she was an auteur." And then what I realized is she made a double transition. She went from acting in film to directing film. And then she went acting television to directing television. And the only other person who did that was Orson Welles. And he was considered the auteur.
Mm.
So I put that in because I think that that's exemplary. Cassavetes did a little bit, but he was after her.
Mm.
And if he's an auteur, then she's an auteur. It doesn't matter how expensive the movies are. She had a part in everything. She brought her own clothes. She brought her own furniture. She spent her own money. She made the songs when they had money enough to do it. She wrote the lyrics. She had her hand in everything. And the new auteur definition is that it's collaboration. So, she's definitely an auteur. And I'll fight that all the way. But
I'll
other
give you
people have
the
called her an
argument from
auteur.
us.
Right.
Yeah, so
Carrie, how are your meatballs coming?
I'll be right back. Maureen, tell us about your book too, because we haven't talked about your book enough. So tell us about your book while I go get the meatballs.
yeah.
Yeah, so His Girl Hollywood, it's my second rom-com set in the golden age of Hollywood in the 1930s. This book follows Arlene Morgan, who has always dreamed of being a director, as we touched on a little bit. And so she's finally getting her chance after winning an Oscar for her screenwriting. and she's directing a musical. She finds out because she's assigned by the studio, so kind of I think probably similar to Trouble with Angels. It doesn't have a lot of control over what project is being assigned to her. And also, her leading man is going to be Don Lamont, the current toast of Broadway. Um, only the problem is that Don Lamont was her childhood best friend. They grew up next door to each other, and the boy that she first loved and has never stopped carrying a torch for. But the two of them have not spoken in 10 years because he went off to New York to pursue his Broadway dreams and has not spoken to her since. So she's going into this project with these fraught and complicated feelings about her leading man, on top of all of the pressures of being a woman directing in the studio system in the late 1930s. And trying to, both fulfill her dreams as a director and figure out the complications of her relationship with Don. And so that's the novel. Arlene is influenced definitely by Ida a lot, but just bits and pieces of her and her approach to things taken from so many female auteurs and professionals at the time. I sort of took the pathway from writing to directing a bit from Frances Marion and her relationship with Mary Pickford, because Arlene was also the assistant to the heroine of the first book, who's a leading lady. And then as far as Don Lamont, if you couldn't guess from his name, he is highly inspired by Gene Kelly, and a lot of his backstory parallels some of the facts of Gene Kelly's life.
Yeah, I read both books this week, and they are just such a fantastic companion, I think, because it's very obvious that Maureen has done a ton of research for her historical fiction book, and I think that reading this first gives you some idea of probably the research that you've done as well. And I think it's really interesting to see what was happening in reality, and then this imagined what could have happened. What if there was a studio head that wanted to give a female director a chance at that time? Like Harry Evans, the studio head in this, I just love. I loved him in the first book as well. So yeah, it's just, I think they're both really great reads. I think they're great together. So I love that they came out around the same time. So if you're buying one, I highly suggest you buy the other one.
Now that's a buy one, get one
I
that
know,
I
right?
think too,
So
I mean,
interesting.
I wouldn't be able to write my stories if it wasn't for people like Alexandra doing the research that I can sort of read and fall back on and have this strong foundation to then imagine off
Mhm.
of. And I had a history professor in college, Deborah Harkness. She's also a fiction writer. And she writes historical fiction as well. And she used to always say to me, like, there are things as a historian that you feel in your bones to be true, but we don't have any like concrete evidence or source for it. It's just, that feeling from the collective stuff that there is proof of. And fiction gives you the opportunity to speak those things that you believe or know to be true, but can't put in nonfiction. And so I feel like that's a really important conversation because, as Alexandra's been saying, like, I didn't do a lot of interviews. She didn't talk a lot about her process or directing. So then in something fictional, you can imagine what the pressures or the emotional state of a woman doing this would have been, and be able to explore that in a way that we don't have access to when it comes to the real people.
That's fantastic, Maureen. I think that's so fantastic. You have a great imagination, and it's, nice to be able to take some basis in history, and then just go with it. And I can't wait to read it. It's at my house, which is still standing in the Palisades, but I will get there eventually.
Oh man. Well, I'm so happy your house is okay.
Me
It's
too.
a very difficult time in Los Angeles for everyone. So,
And where can people find both of your books?
well, mine is available most places books are sold. Barnes and Noble generally has copies. It is on Amazon, although I encourage people to instead use bookshop.org, which their proceeds go to the indie bookstore of your choice. It's at the Ripped Bodice, which has physical locations in Culver City and Brooklyn, New York, but they also have a website from which you can order, and hopefully also other indie bookstores, but that's, there, it always depends on their stock and what they've chosen to order. So I would advise maybe looking online before walking into a bookstore.
I think mine's on Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and UT Press, which I encourage people to go to the press to buy it. And they're going to do an audiobook.
Oh,
That's
fantastic.
fantastic.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
just
mine, I have an audio edition as well. So any of those Audible, Libro FM, Spotify, you can listen to it.
yeah,
I also
interesting.
always want to shout out Larry Edmonds. They're the last surviving bookstore in all of Hollywood. They've been there since the 1930s, and it's challenging for them. So anytime you can try to call them or check in with them and see if they have it as well.
Yeah, well, he's going to be at the event, so I think as
Yeah.
long as I got it to him, he'll be able to have some there and some at his store.
And
Yeah.
I'll post links on my Facebook page after the episode's over to the event. Here are the meatballs, by the way.
Oh my God, they look so good.
They look
And
great.
what you do is after you get them out of the oven, you take a little bit of soy sauce, ketchup, mustard, and pineapple juice. I know that probably sounds a little wacky, but and then you put parsley for garnish. So I think they
That's
turned out
amazing.
well. They look good. And
Looks
again, I think
so
they make a
good.
perfect hearty recipe. And last summer, I also did Ida's 1934 recipe for lemon mousse, and it was fantastic. So Ida has never let me down on screen or in the kitchen ever. She delivers the goods.
Same. I have yet to watch an Ida movie that I did not love, whether she was acting or directing in it.
No, she's amazing. She really is. I'm glad she's being remembered.
Well, we have you to thank for that,
Yes.
Alexandra.
Not really.
Yes.
There's a lot of
Thank you.
books, but
I know there are, but it's just, it really, I can, as I said when I was talking about my book, cannot stress the importance of researchers and historians like you making sure that these women are remembered and that their films are restored so that people can watch them and see them. So thank you for the work you do. It's really important.
oh, thank you for saying that, Maureen. It's very kind of you. Appreciate it. I can't wait to read your book now. It'd be a movie.
That would be great from your
It
little
would be a fantastic
female
movie.
series.
Directed by a female, we can hope.
Right. And I just have to thank all three of you. I mean, because I just have to pinch myself that the people I've been able to get and to talk to and to have on Hollywood Kitchen. I'm just so, so grateful to be able to have these conversations, celebrate these stars, and encourage other people to read these books.
Well, it's because of you. It's because of your very you're really focused and interested in this, and it's real and it comes through. Your authenticity is great. There you are with the cold and flu in the bathrobe and everything. I love it.
Yes, thank
Show
you,
must
Carrie.
go on.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you guys for thank you for
Oh.
tuning in.
Well, thank you for having us, and I hope you get some rest today.
It's been a week. Thank
Yeah.
you, and
I'll take
please
a nap.
please stay tuned for more food, fun, and film history from Hollywood Kitchen. Thank you, ladies, so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.